Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland State University College of Law. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a practicing lawyer, CEO of two large nonprofit organizations, and as an Ohio State Representative, State Senator, Attorney General, and Lieutenant Governor. And the lessons I've learned come down really to just two words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. We'll learn the leadership lessons of these highly effective leaders. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are custodians of democracy. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice. And they are living leadership. Well, everybody, welcome back to the second half of the class, and I couldn't be more excited that our guest this second half is another very distinguished judge, and she had better judgment than Dan Polster. Dan Polster went to Harvard Law School. She had the good judgment to go to Cleveland State University College of Law. So, Justice Stewart, you won up Judge Polster on that one. So, thank you very much. Justice Melody Stewart has many, many firsts, but the one that perhaps she's best known for is that she's the first Black woman elected to the Ohio Supreme Court. That's pretty impressive just to be elected to the Ohio Supreme Court, but to break barriers as well as she has throughout her life is even more important. Justice Stewart is distinguished career, not just as a lawyer and as a judge, but even in academia, and for that matter, in music. She is what I consider a Renaissance woman in all sense of the word. She does everything, and she does everything well. She earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Cincinnati College of Law, Conservatory of Music. And as a law student, she was awarded a prestigious Patricia Roberts Harris Fellowship at our law school. Following graduation, she served as an assistant law director for the cities of Cleveland and East Cleveland, eventually returning to our law school and case law school in various capacities as a lecturer, adjunct instructor, assistant dean, full-time faculty member. She's done just about everything. She even taught at the University of Toledo College of Law as well, and at Ursuline. She earned her doctorate as a Mandel Leadership Fellow at the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. And she served for many years, starting in 2006, on the Ohio Court of Appeals. Like Judge Dan Polster, she's a member of our Hall of Fame. And in a recent feature article that I sent to all of you in Cleveland Magazine, it started by saying, the piano-playing legal whiz from Cleveland was not necessarily destined to sit on a bench. Early on, it looked like she'd be on a piano bench. Because she also is somebody who is very proficient in music. She was the only child in her neighborhood with a piano at home. So, Justice Melody Stewart, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to ask all of our students now to turn off their cameras, but to stay tuned, and they'll be asking you questions in about 20 minutes, but I'll begin with this. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, and whether there was ever a time in your childhood when you thought that someday you actually might be a judge.
Oh, well, let me start with the end first, because that's easy. I don't even know if I knew what a judge was when I was a child, let alone had any aspirations to be one. So, and then I'll go back to the beginning, to the initial question. I was born and raised here in the city of Cleveland, over in University Hospital in the, whatever the women's part of the clinic was where children are born. And I was raised and didn't live too far from there. I was raised in the Huff area, Huff neighborhood of Cleveland, to a single mother who had me later in life. My mother was 40 when I was born. And my mother is a child of the segregated South and didn't have much formal education at all, only went up to what was the equivalent of probably the 8th grade in Virginia, when all the Black children were educated in the same room ages 6 to about 12 or 13. And my mother was one of 11 children. So when she, got past that final school age, she was sent up north to live with a sibling and then make her way there. Although my mother didn't have a lot of formal education, she was well read and somehow, some way, learned a lot of things on her own, took an appreciation for the arts and cultures. And then by the time, again, I was born, she instilled that in me. So I, at a very young age, learned to play Scrabble. I think she taught me how to play Scrabble when I was 6 or 7. And I have to say, I didn't beat her until I was in college. So she was well-read. She wrote poetry. She acted at Karamu Theater here. And we always had music in the house. Of course, we listened to Motown music, but we also listened to Mozart and Bach and Beethoven. And I have to say, embarrassingly, when she'd play that music, I would sometimes cover my ears and go through the house and lay on the couch and just whine at that music because I wanted to listen to the Jackson 5 and the Temptations and, Motown sound. But I have to say I got used to it over a certain period of time. And who would have known that I'd go on to be a classically trained pianist? But it just goes to show you about those seeds that are planted. So she also instilled in me a love for musical theater and those sort of things. And my mother taught me how to read the ticker tape symbols on in the newspaper, because when she saved up enough money, she did buy stock in I think CEI or First Energy or some electric company, and would show me how I can tell whether the shares were up or down. So I was exposed to a very young age to a lot of different things. Judging and being in the judiciary and running for elected office was not one of them. We did have a state rep that lived in our apartment building, but I didn't know what a state rep was. And he used to go down the streets in his foghorns and tell people to vote for him. And I just thought the whole process was a little bit weird. So to answer your question, and the adults who worked in my neighborhood, worked at the grocery stores or worked at the post office like my mother, or were secretaries. And there weren't a whole lot of professionals in the area. And the only thing I knew about law, of course, were police. And I did live in Huff during the Huff riots. And I remember the National Guard coming down the street and there being curfews put in place. So there's not any defining moment I can say that made me think, I might like this law thing or want to be a lawyer, because as a child, I had no idea of the concept or what was even possible in the legal profession.
How do you move from a classically trained pianist to a lawyer? Let's not even get to the judge yet. How do you even decide to go to law school after focusing much of your childhood, it sounds like, on music?
Well, again, never, ever thought about law school until I did. I do have an older sister who is about 18 and a half years older than I am. So significantly, she was graduating from high school when I was born, who has a law degree from our law school. We graduated from law school about 10 years apart. But so I was in high school when she was in law school. And I have to tell you, I hated the fact that she was in law school, because I thought she should be bonding with me, her younger sister, and she worked full-time and she went to law school part-time. So she was always working and always studying and always working and always studying. But even when she graduated, and I attended her graduation at the law school and watched her study for the bar, I still had no interest whatsoever in the law. And as evidenced by the fact that I studied music in undergraduate school, because, as I often jest, what would somebody with a name like Melody, what else would I study, right? So I got my undergraduate degree in music primarily because there is nothing, and I repeat, nothing else I was interested in doing but studying music. I wanted to know how it worked. And so I studied music theory. I took courses like the physics of sound and music, 18th and 16th century counterpoint, analysis of 20th century music, orchestration, score reading, along with being proficient in my instrument. I never thought about, what job might I get with a bachelor's degree in music? So never thought about work. I just, figured work was one thing and studying was another. And so when I finished when I finished undergraduate school with my music degree at the conservatory, I promptly took that degree and got a job in the healthcare industry. And I worked for a local healthcare management company where I managed the office for about a year. I actually got the job while I was undergraduate school and would commute back from Cincinnati to Cleveland to do work on the weekends, way before Zoom and teleworking. Obviously, it was 71 North and South. But after working for a year there, I got intellectually bored. And the vice president of the company, who also happened to be an alum of our law school, was going to law school part-time, and he'd sit his books down and go in his office, and I would peruse through his books, contracts, corporations, and I just thought it was interesting. So I called my sister and asked, I'm thinking about applying to law school. What do you think? She was silent for a moment and said, I wouldn't do it if I were you. And so I said, oh, wow, okay. So I applied the next day to law school and was accepted, and the rest is history. But I've got to tell all of you listening in here, and this is the absolute truth, I spent a considerable amount of time in law school asking myself if I really wanted to be there, if I really want to go to law school, and really questioning whether I really wanted to be a lawyer. Not because I hated it, I didn't. I thought the classes were very intellectually stimulating. I loved moot court. I remember the first time I saw the trophies in the moot court cupboard, and I said, I want one of those, and proceeded to go about getting those. And some of my dearest friends I met in law school. So it wasn't a question of my ability to do it or whether it was interesting. I just didn't know what I was going to do or be as a lawyer. And even walking across the stage, getting my degree, or getting that piece of paper that tells you you'll get your degree once your grades are all in, even walking across the stage, I just didn't have a concept or clue what I would do as a lawyer or with a law degree. And the truth be told, sometimes I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Do not get me wrong, being on the Supreme Court is a great gig. But I'm not one of those people who had a defined path and knew all along what I was going to do with my law degree, or couldn't wait to be a judge, or just never. I just took each step as it was presented in front of me and tried to do the best I could with what I had. And what happened for me, which I might be going too far along in your questioning, Lee, is that doors begin to open and paths begin to be placed before you that you travel down, and you go, I think maybe this is the turn I'm supposed to take, or this is what I'm supposed to do, or I find this interesting. Let me learn more about that. And people recognize what you do and help you go down those avenues and go through those doors.
When you think about your transition from the world of music to the world of law, is there a connection there? Was there a set of skills that you acquired as a classical pianist that actually you could use in law school, or use as a lawyer, or use as a judge?
There are, and I have to tell you, I didn't know that ahead of time. And every single solitary lawyer I've ever spoken to who has studied an instrument or taken music has said the same thing. When I was campaigning and I'd meet lawyers and they'd say, oh, I studied the violin, or I took drums. We all say the same thing. I have to first tell you all, when I started law school, and I wasn't a sophisticated pre-law student at all. Like, I didn't know there were LSAT prep courses. I didn't know that there were law school rankings. I just didn't, I was clueless about all that. All I knew is what I was trained to do when I was in high school, which is get a good night's sleep, eat breakfast, take 2 or 3 number 2 pencils with good erasers, and go take the tests. Standardized tests. That's how I took the LSAT, and fortunately, did well enough there. I applied to Cleveland State's law school because that was the law school that was in my city. My sister went to law school there, had gone to law school there, and I worked full time and needed to be able to have access to part-time classes. I didn't know about U.S. News World Report. I didn't, it might not have even existed back then. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know there was a hierarchy or a pecking order. I went to the law school where I could get down there in time and get back to work in time, and you know, would put my legal education up against anyone, anywhere, as we later found out. But I was a music major coming into a strange environment that I didn't know much about, and thought I would get my clock cleaned by people who were pre-law majors, people who were political science majors, people who were government majors or journalism majors. I just thought, you know, I'm going to be out of here in a semester. Not because I didn't have any confidence in my own intellectual ability, but just thought, how do you make the leap from music to law? And what I found out after that first semester, after some people were not there, and it really was the first year because we didn't get grades until the end of the first year. But after the first year, and some people were not there who looked the part, who came in their suits and their briefcases, and who were political science majors and who graduated with honors and had not quite made it, and I was still standing, I realized that some of those courses, the discipline in practicing my instrument, and courses like orchestration and score reading, where you've got to pay a lot of attention to details and see linearly where things are going, were extremely helpful to me in law school, and to a person, to a man and woman who studied music while in law school, prior to going to law school. They've all said the same thing to me.
It's fascinating. And I think that we have debunked the myth that you have to actually major in something specific in order to be successful in law school. We used to think it was government, economics, history, something like that. But the truth is that some of our best graduates have been graduates who focused either on math or on English or literature or music. And you're a perfect example of that.
Well, and I have to tell you, when I was assistant dean at the Law School for Admissions, I can't tell you the amount of the many prospective students who would say, when they say, you know, should I change? I'm going to change my major to political science. I'm going to do this. Should I major in that? I'd say major in anything that you're interested in, because that you'll get good grades. And no, I mean, take courses, critical thinking courses are good, and some writing, because you do a lot of reading and writing in law school, but take what you love so you'll do well in it. And would then say, I was a music major. And it was such a release for so many of them, thinking they had to pigeonhole themselves in a way that took them to law school.
Before we move to your legal and judicial career, let's stay on law school for a second, because you're speaking to a number of very talented law students. Are there any lessons you've learned from all your career? If you could look back, anything you would have done differently in law school, and any lessons you learned from law school?
Yes, I think there are times when we, as young people, not just students, but as younger people, probably get a little cocky in what we do, particularly if we've had some success in doing it. I think as my grades were good, there were times when I could have done better to do better, and chose not to, for whatever other reasons, to work more, or, you know, to do something else. And although, you know, I can't say it hurt me anywhere along the way, but I think I probably would have made a more concerted effort to do better more often than I did. And you know, and that's kind of hard to say, because you have to triage that with other things that go on in your life. But there aren't a whole lot of regrets I have about law school, and doing the journal, and doing moot court, and traveling and looking into the things. Well, at some point in law school, I thought I was going to be a practicing lawyer in the healthcare industry. I took all the healthcare electives I could possibly take. I was interested in that field. I have practiced healthcare law not a single solitary day of my life. So it just goes to show you, you know, the best made plans. So that I would say, other than that, I really can't say, because if I say I wish I've done this differently, or did this more, or did this less, it would have taken me in another path in life. And that means that I might not necessarily be here, be where I am. And I'm okay with where I am.
So walk us through what happened the day after you graduated law school. What did you decide to do next, and why?
Oh, that's probably a story I should say for another day, but let me fast forward to at least what I did when I had to first start working as a lawyer.
Okay.
Which was not a whole lot unlike my life in general. I've always been a fairly responsible individual, except when I graduated from law school and went out and partied on the West Coast. But other than that, I've really been fairly responsible. And it was just, and I was fortunate too that I started working as a lawyer in the last place where I had clerked, which was the City of Cleveland Law Department, at a whopping $6 an hour as a law clerk for the City of Cleveland Law Department. And that was a pay raise because it was $5.75 before I got there. And I was fortunate enough that I was able to practice law immediately with my internship papers you can get once you've completed 2/3 of your law school education. You can get your internship papers with the Ohio Supreme Court, such as you can actually go into the courtroom and practice. If those of you who haven't done that, I strongly recommend that you do. I know you have to do it for the clinics. And so I tried my first case as a third-year law student, CEI versus the City of Cleveland. I'll never forget it. And I remember the chief counsel, the general counsel gave me the assignment and put another senior attorney with me. And that senior attorney came in my office and said, yeah, I don't know anything about this case. So you'll be doing the depositions, you'll be doing the cross exam, you'll be doing the direct exam. And let me know if you need any help, but I don't know anything about it. So good luck.
Wow. What was the case about?
It was a case where the water workers from the Cleveland Water Department were doing some under the ground, some undersurface work, and their equipment hit a utility line that was encased, and it punctured the encasement. Not so much that it caused them to know it or have any injury, but it punctured it enough such that when they sealed it back up, there was water and sediment that got into the lines, into the casing, and ruined quite a bit of footage of those lines. And so this CEI sued Cleveland for the cost of that repair.
You also spent some time in academia. Talk about that.
I did. When I first graduated from law school, my then legal writing professor, Deborah Klein, approached me and asked if I would be an adjunct instructor for legal writing. The legal writing department at the law school was not as well staffed and as big as it is now. It was really one director and a lot of adjunct professors. And one director was full-time, a full-time legal writing professor. You can probably guess who that was, Sandra Kerber. And everybody else the rest of us were adjunct instructors. So I was practicing law full-time during the day and coming in at evening and teaching a legal writing class. And I loved it. I loved grading the papers. I loved telling students. I made that same mistake when I was a first-year law student. And I liked that aspect of teaching. And then an assistant dean job was created at the law school. I applied and was not chosen. Someone else was chosen for the position and ironically did not come. And I was second in line and got that position as an assistant dean for student affairs. And then that career took off then. And I loved law academia. I liked the research and writing for the scholarly articles. I liked working with students. I learned from them as well as them learning from me. And that's kind of where I thought I would end my career.
For the record, if I had been dean, you would have been the first choice. I want to make that clear.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So obviously, you're now a judge. So I want to talk about the transition from a legal career and a career in academia to the Ohio Court of Appeals. Walk us through that transition.
Well, for those of you who don't know, I did run for the Court of Appeals 3 times before I was successful. Again, even as a practicing lawyer, being before the judges in the judiciary, knowing a few, I never, ever, you hear me? I say ever thought about running for a judge or being a judge. I didn't even know what it took to get there. I knew federal judges were appointed, obviously, and I knew that our state judges were elected, but never even thought of it. I was finishing up a visiting faculty position teaching at the University of Toledo Law School. And I was trying to figure out then what I was going to do. Unfortunately, at that time, my mother had become very ill and needed my care a lot. And I went and talked to a few people in career planning or career resources, and someone said to me, "You ever think about being a judge?" And I said, "Absolutely not." Because one, I thought they meant being a trial court judge. And with all due respect to, Judge Polster and the many trial court judges I know, I did not think that was for me. Although I wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grow up, I didn't think it was a trial court judge. I just thought I wouldn't be able to tolerate well my psyche, the man inhumanity against man that you see every day in the trial court. It would irritate me to no end to see incompetent lawyering take place there. I'd want to pull a party over to the side and go, "Hey, you might want to get another lawyer. This guy doesn't know what he's doing." So, and then that would be inappropriate, of course. So so I just thought, no, absolutely not. I don't think I could be a trial court judge. And the person said, "No, appellate court. I mean, you've been in law academia for quite some time. That seems like the natural progression from law academia to the appellate court." And I thought, never thought of that, because like most people, you think you take steps up from that. You practice law, you become a trial court judge, you go to the Court of Appeals, you go to the Supreme Court. Well, no, not necessarily. There are no rules that say you have to do that trajectory. And so I looked into what it took to run for judge in Cuyahoga County, which is totally separate, of course, from being a judge. And I'm not politically connected. I was not then. I am not now. I've never really been politically connected. And so, but I went through the process of learning the ropes of being elected. So I lost in my first primary in 2000. And another obstacle you run into is when you're going to skip a step. If you're running for an intermediate appellate court, you're going to have trial court judges who are running to get there too. And they've got name recognition because they've been on the ballot before. And most voters, unfortunately, don't know the difference between trial court judge and appellate court judge, or even Supreme Court justice. So those trial court judges who wanted to get to the appellate court too always had an advantage over me, who had no ballot name recognition. So I lost the primary in 2000 by quite a bit. I came in second of three candidates. And then I lost the primary again in 2002. And I've only run for open seats. I believe when there's a seat that's available, anybody who's qualified has the right to run for them. But for me, I would only run for open seats after someone left the office or was retired. I didn't believe in running against someone to take his or her seat. And so I lost in 2002 in a two-person primary, but got closer. I got 48% of the vote then. Then there were no open seats in 2004, and in 2006, another seat got open, and I ran for that one. And this time there wasn't a trial court judge in that seat, and there were 3 attorneys running for it, and I came up through the middle and won the primary. And if any of you are familiar with Cleveland or Cuyahoga County politics, once you win a primary in this county, you pretty much have won the election because you're probably good for the general. So I won the primary in 2006, and it was an unexpired term where a judge left early, and I did 4 years in that term, and then fortunately was reelected unopposed for the next 2 terms.
Well, you were clearly persistent, and a lot of people who know politics know that many, many, many successful elected officials have lost before they won. And you're a good example of that, but you didn't give up and you kept going.
But that third time was going to be the last time.
Is that right? And then back to piano, huh?
Yeah. Or practicing.
Right. So talk about your career on the Court of Appeals. And if you can you identify a case in particular that stands out, that was a difficult case where you had to make a decision?
At the appellate court level, most of our cases, because you get an appeal as a matter of right at the Court of Appeals from any trial court decision, traffic ticket, termination of parental rights, felony conviction, will contest, etc. You get appeal as a matter of right. So at the appellate court level, we don't get to pick and choose our cases. A lot of our cases, particularly criminal cases, deal with some of the same issues. the conviction was against the manifest weight of the evidence, or the evidence wasn't sufficient to sustain the conviction, or trial court should not have admitted this evidence or failed to admit that evidence. So sometimes they were kind of routine. But because of that, I think you had to be more careful that you didn't just read over or gloss over everything in the same way. One case that stands out in particular to me is a case that I sat on as appellate court judge, and ironically made it to the Supreme Court just as I was getting to the Supreme Court. And of course, had to recuse myself from the case at the Supreme Court level, because I guess it would be wrong for me to sit in judgment of a case I already sat in judgment on. But I was a dissenting opinion in that case. And that's a case where a woman was convicted for being accomplice to a murder, and as aiding and abetting or accomplice liability on the crime. And the evidence just was not there. And similarly, another case that probably sticks out in my mind more so is a case where, and so in the case where the woman was convicted, I was a dissent. It was a 2-1 decision. I was a dissenting opinion. On another case I had where a gentleman had been convicted for murder, spent decades, at that time, maybe 16, 18 years in prison. DNA testing got better. DNA tests, there was no DNA found on her that matched him. There were fingernail scrapings, and after the technology got better, the lawyers for this gentleman with the Ohio Innocence Project asked to get the fingernails tested, and if there is any material under there, and it's not his client, it's not the defendant, it will prove his innocence. Well, the trial court judge allowed that DNA testing. This woman had been, initially, the guy was charged with rape and murder, but the semen found on her did not match him. So then the prosecution dropped the rape charge and just charged him with murder. There was material there. It was not the defendant. It matched the semen. So then the lawyers said, no, let my guy out, motion for a new trial, motion for release, motion, the motion sat pending for about 18 months. And finally, the lawyers filed a writ of mandamus to mandate the court make it rule on those motions. The court immediately denied them, as courts mostly do when you push them to make a decision, and denied them, said, well, the jury heard that the DNA didn't match you. And I was mortified, one, in that came up on appeal, and my 2 colleagues affirmed that decision. I was a dissent once again. And I passed the building where this crime happened every Sunday on my way to church in the Huff neighborhood where I grew up. And I always remember thinking of the woman who was killed and her teenage daughter who found her, and the man who, by all accounts that I could see from the evidence, was wrongly convicted. And would just think about them. And ironically, when I was running for Supreme Court, I went to a breakfast at the Innocence Project where people had been exonerated from crimes they didn't commit, and he was at that breakfast.
Wow, what a story.
Mm-hmm.
Final questions before we open it up to the students. Tell us how you ended up on the Ohio Supreme Court.
1,675,000 votes, I think, something like that. I had been approached to run for the Supreme Court on a couple different occasions. Now, I just told you I got to the Court of Appeals in 2006. I was approached to run in 2008, which I have to tell you did not make a lot of sense to me. It's like I said, I just got here. Can I learn this job first? And so over time, and we'll talk to the chair of the party that I run under, the Democratic Party, and it didn't make sense to me, or the timing wasn't right. And so approached again in 2016 to run, and that didn't make sense to me because I was up for re-election in 2016. So it was like, run for my seat, likely unopposed, or run for a seat statewide where no one who looks like me had ever been elected before. I think I'm going to run for my own seat. So I ran for the Court of Appeals in 2016, and then in 18, 2 seats came up, and I was approached again to run because 2 justices were retiring. And then it seemed right to do. And I had to think about it and did a lot of consult with people, and told them if I could be shown a path to victory, I would do this. But I made it my mission with running for the Supreme Court to educate people across the state about the courts and the judicial system and what judges do and why it's important to vote for them, and just to kind of give a civic lesson. So that way, if I was not successful in winning the race, I would have educated more people about the judiciary and the law. And that was a good thing. And I put on my social media account the night after the polls closed that I already felt like a winner. I'd met people in this state who I never would have gotten the chance to meet had I not run. And I saw parts of our state that I've never seen that are, quite frankly, just beautiful, especially in some of the rural counties. And so, you know, the success had already happened by the time the polls closed, and the victory was just kind of icing on the cake.
It was quite the victory. Even LeBron James tweeted about it.
Even LeBron James.
I remember that. If everybody would put their cameras back on, I would like you to be able to ask questions of Justice Stewart. And who would like to go first? Just raise your electronic hand.
Everybody's awake now, huh?
Everybody's awake. This is proof that they're still here, Justice Stewart. I want
Yeah, but their eyes are closed until they heard you say, okay, cameras on.
Exactly. We're going to go to Abby Jones first.
Justice Stewart, thank you so much for being with us today. I've heard a lot from attorneys that paths just sort of present themselves, and you said that as well. And it's sort of hard to plan your trajectory, and it's something that kind of presents itself. And I'm wondering, what can we do in the meantime to prepare our skill set before we know what those pathways are going to be, and how do we recognize that those are the right pathways to choose?
Yeah, those are great questions, Abby, because not only was I asking those questions when I was sitting in the seat that you're sitting in, probably not at your place, at your house, but you know what I mean, theoretically speaking. And I asked in my first few years, first decades as lawyers, and that I still ask sometimes now, what worked for me, and you know, it will definitely say what worked for me is that every job I had, every committee I served on, every organization I belonged to, I learned as much as I could. And I have to tell you, I learned from good lawyers as well as lawyers who are not so good, because they show you and teach you what not to do. So pay attention to them without question. I was appalled when I came across my first few unsavory attorneys, if you will. When I was a young litigator, I had a senior attorney who just outright told me she was going to take advantage of me because she was seasoned, knew what she was doing, practiced law longer than I've been, you know, out of diapers, and was going to clean my clock, and told me, don't even think about negotiating with her. And then I was fortunate enough to go against another senior attorney representing a client who was professional and respectful, and that attorney won more. I ended up getting settlement authority on both cases, and the nicer attorney got more, not just because he was nicer and more professional, but because he was professional in how he prepared his case and represented, you know, his client's side and interest, and the other person just was trying to be a bully. And she may have been a whole lot more senior to me, but I was not going to be bullied. Here's an ironic part. I can say this now because that lawyer is deceased, the bully. That lawyer went on to sit on the Court of Appeals. I ended up sitting in her seat.
Whoa, quite the story. I love
It's a full circle moment. And then we were fine by the time, you know, I got a little more, you know, seasoned, but it's just the way she practiced. She was just a brash practitioner. But so when I say you learn stuff everywhere you go, you do. You guys are the generation that you're going to have more than one job. You know, back in our days, I have colleagues who came out and went to firms, and they're still there. They're still at those firms, or maybe have made a lateral move and gone to a similar type role. And if for those of you who do start working out at large firms, you got to be careful that you just don't get held captive by the salary, by the money, because it's going to be a lot, particularly compared to so many other jobs, and particularly if you're going to work in the public sector. I was very fortunate to come out of undergraduate school and law school with minimal to no law school debt, and so I had the options of taking the jobs when I came out of law school, the jobs I had offered to me, I took the one that I thought was going to give me the most experience the fastest. And that was the City of Cleveland Law Department, because I got litigation experience real fast there. But I learned motion practice. You learn it well, because what I realized is the glory or the glamorous aspect of being a lawyer is not always best for your client. You might want to get in the courtroom and try that case, but it might be better to settle the case. You save your client money, you save your client's time and strife and their emotions. And so you always have to think about who it is you're representing, and be a good representative for whatever that means. Even as an elected official, I feel that I am representative of the people of this state and doing the job. And sometimes they're not going to always agree with the judicial or legal decision I have to make. And when I know that's going to happen, I try to explain it in a way that says, yeah, I got to hold my nose on this too. But I recognize that this is what you think should happen. So just keeping in mind who it is you're doing the work for.
Great. Let's go next to Kelly Tompkins.
Kelly's
No,
got a
it'd be nice
question?
to-
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
got
I
one.
do. I do. I'll give you the one comment, and then I won't put you on the spot. I'll give you the
Okay.
opportunity to do the either or.
Okay.
But one comment is, it's funny, as a general counsel, having hired litigators across the country, one of the best trial lawyers I ever worked with was not only a music major, but an elementary and junior high school teacher.
Mm.
And I remember her telling me her ability to take a complex topic and make it very simple
Mm.
for the average juror was such a gift. So anyway, I'll leave that. The pros and cons of judges being popularly elected rather than appointed. I won't ask you your view on that, but I'm always curious on what you think the pros and cons are, because I know a lot of states, you don't run for office as a Supreme Court justice,
Mhm.
but you do in Ohio.
Right. And not only do we run in Ohio, now we're running under party labels, which that's a
Right.
whole other discussion for another day. I have to tell you, Kelly, and you may already know this, I'll tell the students, that is probably the most disconcerting part of my job. Not that I have to run for election, but knowing that it doesn't matter how I do my job, how well I do, how respected a jurist I might be, how much fidelity I give to the work and the law, and just trying to be a good public servant, that it really doesn't matter for whether or not I get to keep my job. The only thing matters is, do I have one more vote than my opponent at the end of the day? And I recognize that so many people will vote for or against me, having no reasons to do whatsoever with my work. And so that's frustrating. And yet you still maintain the level of work that you do. I don't think popular elections, particularly for the judiciary, is a good thing. Is an appointment system better? Will it be less political? I don't know about that. I don't think so. But I think it would be at least more informed. So many people vote now and they don't even know who the judges are or what they do. And right now, all they have to do is look at party designation and decide whether you're inclined to lean more Republican or Democrat. And another problem with that is, what if you don't want to be a Democrat or a Republican? What if you just want to be an independent jurist? You don't have a snowball's chance, and where, of being elected in this state, because the petition process is such that, to run in any of the counties in Ohio for appellate court or common pleas or even some of the municipal courts, I think I needed 50 valid signatures to get on the ballot for Court of Appeals. For Ohio Supreme Court, I need 1,000. If you run as an independent, you need a certain percentage of the total votes in the last gubernatorial election. It's just, and so what are we saying here about quality? So we're just saying here the names on the front of the jerseys mean more than anything else for who our judiciary is. Not even the names on the back of the jerseys anymore. And I'm not sure that that's the type of government, particularly in the judiciary, that we should have.
Let's go next to Paula.
Thank you, Justice Stewart. Along those lines, I'm seeing an increase in polarization in politics in really every area of life. And I'm wondering if you could take a minute and speak to what you respect with attorneys who come before the court, specifically with regard to how they present their arguments, how they present an objective interpretation of the law, both people in front of your court and people you would hire as law clerks. What are the credentials that you would look for?
Credentials I look for in law students or people I hire are students. It might surprise you guys. I don't look at, if you're still in law school or you've graduated from law school and you pass the bar, your grade point average does not mean as much to me. Having said that, when you have done well in your class, and I mean really super well, 3.8 and above, consistently, it says that you've mastered an understanding of your subject matter that, you know, that exceeds a lot of your colleagues in law school. However, I've hired people at the top of their class, and I've hired people who finished in the bottom of their class. So what I look for and I take externs from all over, because that's just completely a learning experience, and that's for them, you know, not for me. But I do have to be, of course, more selective in who I hire, because I've got a job to do, and I count heavily on my staff, especially my judicial attorneys, who are my, you know, actually professional clerks, who one, knows my style of writing, who I can trust to do the research and analysis the way it should be done, not the way to prejudge a case or to have the disposition be a certain way. And I don't always want people around me who think like me. I want people who think differently, who can call my attention to some blind spot that I might have. I recognize I'm not all knowing. I recognize that I have my own implicit biases that I try to check every day, but having a good, well-rounded person around me, or people around me, helps me to do better with that. From the lawyer standpoint, well-prepared, an understanding of who your audience is, and just respect for being there. And when I say respect for being there, not the lawyers who fall all over you with a bunch of your honors and use, you know, superlatives and hyperbole, and, you know, you spend half of your oral argument, you know, sucking up to the bench, if you will. That's not preparing your case such that you get to your strongest points first. A recognition of where you are. For instance, there are some lawyers who came before my colleagues and me at the Court of Appeals and at the Supreme Court, who are very demonstrative. And you want to say, counselor, do you see a jury in here? Don't be flamboyant. Don't have to bang the podium. You know, it's an intellectual discussion about the law when you're at the appellate court level. So leave the drama outside of an appellate courtroom. So just those sort of things, who are respectful to the opposition. As presiding judge on the Court of Appeals, I can remember on 3 different occasions having to tell lawyer counsel, please address the bench when presenting your argument, because he would constantly point over and say, they did this and they did that, and they, you know, turn and point their fingers. And it's like, you know, it's the other side's lawyer. It's not even the other side, the party, it's the lawyer. Say, counsel, please direct your arguments to us. Thank you. Counsel, please. So just those sort of things, and knowing where you are.
What's the difference between the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court for you?
The volume of work, without question, although you hear many more cases at the Court of Appeals level. You know, it's an appellate court that's divided into 3 panels, regardless of how many members there are on the court. So the 8th District Court of Appeals in Cuyahoga County there are 12 judges there. They divide the work up by 12 judges in panels of 3. You can have 4 panels sitting at any time. The Supreme Court, we're en banc. We have to make decisions on everything. So we divide the cases up, or you divide them up at the appellate court. So you only have to weigh in on those merit cases, those motions for reconsideration. At the Court of Appeals, you took turns being the motions judge. So you were the motions judge 1 month a year, where you ruled on motions for extension of time, et cetera. Supreme Court, we rule on everything. We have to decide everything. So it's our merit cases, our direct appeals, it's our motions for delayed appeals, it's original actions, it's direct appeals from death penalty cases and public utilities cases, it's disciplinary actions for lawyers and judges across the states, it's rules promulgations, it's administrative staff, it's hiring of top directors. We have a staff of 260 employees at the court. It is not worth the pay raise from appellate court to Supreme Court. So if anybody ever says, oh, they're running Supreme Court for the money, don't believe it.
This is a leadership class, as you know. So the final question I have for you today is leadership lessons, reaching back to your entire career, from when you were a little girl and you were focused on music, to in college when you were studying the physics of sound and music, to when you were earning $6 an hour at the city of Cleveland, when you were in academia, when you were a practicing lawyer, when you were on the Court of Appeals and now the Supreme Court. What are the lessons you've learned?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that at each stage in my life, I am or was where I was supposed to be, even when I didn't know it. There are times when you might want something so bad. If you haven't already experienced it, you're going to get letters of rejection, or you're not going to be hired at the job that you think you want, or get the position that you just was your dream job. Don't think of it as rejection. Think of it as redirection. There are various things that happen in our lives that put us on another course. You know, had I gone to another law school, would I be where I am now? Had I taken another job coming out of law school, maybe a job that paid more, as opposed to going with a job that I thought would give me litigation experience faster, would I be where I am now? And I'll close with kind of a personal anecdote. As I told you earlier, I was raised by a single mother. My father never raised or supported me, or wasn't in my life. But when he died in 2012, there was nothing left unsaid between us. It's a complicated story about, you know, my getting here on this planet. But when my mother died in 2000, so 23 years ago, he came to my mother's funeral, and I was in my 30s at the time, late 30s. And he said to me, I'm your only parent now. If you need anything, you come to me. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm in my 30s. Now, my mother never badmouthed my father, and he'd had another family, and a wife who was ill. And so again, the circumstances were a little challenging. But when I asked him all sorts of questions about why he never came around, why he never raised me, why he never supported me, and he said, I saw the job your mother was doing, and I didn't want to interfere. And I thought, and if you had been a boy, it would have been different. I think I would have been around more. And I said, well, girls need their fathers too. And he said, I know that now. He says, and if I had to do it over different, I would have done it differently. And I looked at him, I said, I'm glad you don't have to do it over, because I don't think I would have wanted it done any differently. I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be where I am. And I don't know whether your being in my life would have been better or worse. I don't know. But I'm fine with how I was raised in the circumstances of my life, even the difficult times, because they were all life lessons. And none of that would have happened had my life been different with his raising me. And it was a release for him too, that took a level of guilt away from him, and just an acceptance of my life was supposed to be exactly where it was.
That's quite a beautiful and inspiring story. And you are a Renaissance woman who was raised by a Renaissance woman. That's clear. And you're a Renaissance woman, not just because you have so many faceted skills, but because you've had a multifaceted career, that you've lived your life in many ways, much like Kelly Tompkins has, much like Sharon Sobel Jordan has. You've lived your life in chapters,
Mhm.
and you were comfortable where you were supposed to be in each of those chapters. And sometimes we get so focused on the career that we're going to pursue that we forget the fact that sometimes you don't have to focus on where you're going to be 15 or 20 years from now. Just be present
Mhm.
where you are now. Do the best you possibly can, because more often than not, if you do extremely well, those opportunities are going to come to you. You're not going to have to
Absolutely.
go after them. And you're a
Absolutely.
perfect example of that.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly believe in that.
So the final lesson I'll extract from your life is one that I think is beautiful. And that is that when you get a no, when you get a failure, when you get a rejection, view it as a redirection. I love that lesson. I've never heard it before, but I'm going to repeat it many times, and I probably won't attribute it to you. I'll claim it myself. It's so good.
I've said it so many times, people will know it's from me.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Justice Melody Stewart, you're one of a kind, and we can't thank you enough. And we couldn't be more proud that you're one of ours, that you're one of our graduates, and that you continue to say yes every time we ask you to do something. You're amazing. You've never said no to me once. I'm sure that's coming. I'm sure I'm going to get a rejection, and I expect that.
And you'll take it as a redirection.
I will take it as a redirection. And in other words, I'll keep asking even when you say no until I get another yes.
Well, I'm proud to be one of Cleveland State's law school alums too.
Thank you. And you're speaking, by the way, to some extraordinarily talented students. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I think more than one of them is going to be in our Hall of Fame. I think more than one of them is going to be a successful judge. And hopefully one of them will actually take your place on the Ohio Supreme Court someday.
Well, I look forward to meeting any or all of you in person. So whenever you see me in public or have the opportunity to come down, and if you haven't thought about externing at the Supreme Court, think about it. I don't know where you are at your stage of your law school career. If you're graduating soon, never mind. But
most of them are 2Ls. We have a couple 3Ls in the class, but most of them are 2Ls, so they do have time.
Without question, think about externing at the court. You can do it remotely. Those who extern with me, I do recommend you try to get to the court at least once during hearings, but you can do it remotely. It's almost like, COVID. We still did externships remotely during COVID.
Justice Stewart, thank you again. Thanks to everybody in the class. We'll see you again next week, and we'll be back in person. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland State University College of Law. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a practicing lawyer, CEO of 2 large nonprofit organizations, and as an Ohio State Representative, State Senator, Attorney General, and Lieutenant Governor. And the lessons I've learned come down really to just 2 words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. We'll learn the leadership lessons of these highly effective leaders. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are custodians of democracy. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership.